She will speak about Jerome, Vigilantius, and the cults of the saints.
Thank you. 1600 years after Jerome allegedly wrote his Contra Vigilantium in a single night in Bethlehem, a new critical edition of the text was published. Of all Jerome's works, the Contra Vigilantium has been deemed his rudest, most abusive, most violent, and least structured polemic. Thus, it seems hardly a credible source for reconstructing the position of Vigilantius. Nevertheless, the text has been used to promote the view of Vigilantius as a true Christian, a proto-Protestant, over and against the paganizing medieval vulgar Catholicism of Jerome. Of course, this is too simplistic by far, even if one ignores the disparaging use of terms. Since the Contra Vigilantium is the only known source for his thought, much of the scholarly attention given to the text has been focused on recovering the thinking of Vigilantius. Jerome's own position has received little consideration by comparison, and though his vitae of the saints Paul, Valerian, and Malchus have been examined at length, there is little in the scholarly literature that discusses Jerome's doctrine of the cults of the saints specifically. One notable scholar, in his analysis of the Contra Vigilantium, argued that Jerome was tacitly endorsing Vigilantius' position, because Jerome did not respond with a coherent explanation of his own doctrine of the power of the saints, or their relics. However, this scholar seems to have failed to take into account the genre of the text. Jerome was not writing a primarily theological treatise, but a personal polemic, an invective, meant to attack and undermine the position and person of Vigilantius, such that Jerome's own position is veiled, as it were, under layers of vituperation. Nor is Jerome engaged in a systematic theology of the cults of the saints. Jerome is not concerned so much with defending his own or the church's beliefs as he is concerned with excoriating Vigilantius. His numerous personal insults make this clear. Jerome calls Vigilantius insane, drunk and drowsy, from the stock of tramps and bandits, a living dog, an inarticulate viper. He says that Vigilantius, quote, vomited up his text while snoring between hangovers, end quote, and even implies that Vigilantius himself is possessed by demons. In order to recover Jerome's own thoughts, then, we must begin by prying back some of these layers, by digging underneath the name-calling and the classical allusions. Then Jerome's own position does emerge, and it looks very different from the opinion he accuses Vigilantius of holding. Jerome's rhetoric carefully identifies himself with apostles, martyrs, and even emperors, thereby claiming their agreement with his obviously orthodox views. In contrast, he paints a portrait of Vigilantius as the heir of a multitude of heretical figures, including Eunomius, Montanus, and Jovinian. In this reconstruction of Jerome's doctrine of the cults of the saints, drawing on the Contra Vigilantium and other texts from his vast oeuvre, I shall focus on a few main points, all of which were contentious vis-a-vis Vigilantius: the honor due to saints and martyrs, the location of the souls of the dead and their intercession on behalf of the living, and the efficacy of relics of the saints. So starting with the honor due the saints. A letter to Reparius, a presbyter in Gaul, dated 404, gives a preview, as it were, of some of Jerome's rhetorical flourish in dealing with Vigilantius. Quote, you tell me that Vigilantius, whose very name wakeful is a contradiction, he ought rather to be described as sleepy, has again opened his fetid lips and is pouring forth a torrent of filthy venom upon the relics of the holy martyrs, and that he calls us who cherish them ashmongers and idolaters who pay homage to dead men's bones, end quote. Jerome proceeds to address the distinction between veneration, or honor, and worship. To worship, colere, to adore, adorare, and to serve, servire, are inappropriate verbs to describe the glory due the saints. Rather, Jerome states, quote, we honor, honoramos, the relics of the martyrs, in order to adore him whose martyrs they are. We honor the servants so that the honor of the servants may overflow to the Lord. End quote. This distinction is also found in the Contra Vigilantium. In what seems to be a direct quotation from his work, Vigilantius hints none too subtly that the honor given the relics of the saints is crossing over into worship. Quote, why is it necessary not only that you honor with such great honor, but also that you worship that I don't know what, which you revere while carrying it around in a little vessel? Why do you kiss and worship dust wrapped in linen?" End quote. Further, Vigilantius states, quote, "We see that a virtually pagan rite has been brought into the church under the pretext of religion." End quote. Jerome's response is clothed in his castigation of Vigilantius. Quote, "Who, you insane man, has ever worshipped martyrs? Who considered a human being to be God?" End quote. Jerome's rhetorical tool here serves to render his opponent's arguments ridiculous. He cites the apostolic examples of Paul, Barnabas, and Peter, who refused to be worshipped as gods, since honor was being given to them when it was owed to God. Jerome further accuses Vigilantius of desiring worship for himself, quote, "so that Vigilantius alone, drunk and drowsy, may be worshipped." End quote. Jerome goes on to defend the practice of relic translation by appealing to the tradition of the church. He mentions the translations of the relics of Andrew, Luke, and Timothy by Emperor Constantius, and the translation of the relics of the prophet Samuel by Emperor Arcadius. While Jerome's view of Constantius is ambiguous, the point he makes is not. If the emperors treat relics with such honor and respect, how much more so ought ordinary people reverence the remains of the saints? That the people who celebrated the translation of Samuel were worshipping Samuel instead of Christ, Jerome dismisses out of hand, rendering Vigilantius' claims farcical. Turning to the location of the souls of the dead and the intercession of the dead on behalf of the living. Jerome addresses this, stating, quote, "You say that the souls of the apostles and martyrs have come to rest either in the lap of Abraham, or in the place of refreshment, or under the altar of God, and that they are unable to leave their tombs and be present where they wish." End quote. Vigilantius objects to the notion that the souls of the saints could be multiplied and travel at will along with the fragments of their bodies. Again, Jerome answers with sharp rhetoric, quote, "Will you set down the laws for God?" End quote. Quoting scripture, he refers to the apostles and martyrs. Quote, "Of them it is written, they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. If the Lamb is everywhere, then those who are with the Lamb must be believed to be everywhere." End quote. This is one of the most significant positive formulations in the whole Contra Vigilantium. Here Jerome states outright his belief that the saints are able to be present in places other than those mentioned by Vigilantius. Saints are able to be present with their remains, and indeed seemingly without their remains, everywhere, ubique. Jerome does not linger on this point, perhaps because it is quite radical, but it is a point to which I shall return. Vigilantius also doubts that the dead are able to intercede on behalf of the living. Jerome says, quote, "You say in your little pamphlet that while we live, we are able to pray for one another reciprocally. After we have died, however, one's prayer on behalf of another cannot be heard." End quote. Jerome again points out the absurdity of this position. If the apostles and martyrs are able to intercede on behalf of the living while they themselves are living, will they not be able to do so once they've achieved their crowns, their victories, and their triumphs? Quote, "Will they have less power after they have begun their life with Christ?" End quote. Jerome's defense of this argument is a bit weak here, but the same point can be found in his other works. Throughout his consolatory letters, the Hieronymian position is that the saints are not only present with Christ, they are reigning with Christ. Indeed, the saints are better able to intercede on behalf of the living now that they are no longer solicitous for themselves. Another example of this is found at the end of Jerome's account of the life of Paula. For Jerome, Paula is united to Christ by her faith and works, such that she may more easily obtain what she asks for. Of course, what Paula will ask for will be petitions on behalf of the living, seeing as she's already attained her reward. Turning to the efficacy of relics. This point, as far as I can tell, has not been examined in scholarship on this text. Vigilantius seems to object to the signs and miracles occurring at the basilicas of the martyrs because they are superfluous. Where the people are already Christian believers, what need is there for such signs and wonders? As if the important question to answer is for whom they occur, not by what miracle, Jerome puffs in reply. Turning Vigilantius' own words against him, Jerome answers, quote, "Tell me how in the vilest dust and ash, the I don't know what, there is such a great presence of signs and powers." End quote. Jerome dares Vigilantius to only enter the basilicas of the martyrs, where the presence of the saints will cleanse him of the demons which are prompting his attacks on these pious practices. Jerome confesses his own trepidations in defense of the power of relics. Quote, "Whenever I am angry and think something evil in my mind, and a phantasm deceives me at night, I do not dare to enter the basilicas of the martyrs." End quote. Though Jerome does not elaborate here, it seems he believes the power and presence of the saints to have a connection with their relics, such that he fears not the evil thought or the phantasm in the night, but entering those places where the saints are most efficacious. So how is this reconcilable with Jerome's earlier statements that the saints are with Christ wherever he is, and therefore can be everywhere? Jerome doesn't provide an answer in this text, so we must look to his other writings. In a letter to Theophilus, Jerome praises the treatise Theophilus had written on the Eucharist and the accompanying liturgical ephemera. Jerome indicates that not only is the Eucharist itself to be honored and reverenced, but that, quote, "the sacred chalices, veils, and other accessories used in the celebration of the Lord's Passion are not mere lifeless and senseless objects devoid of holiness, but that rather from their association with the body and blood of the Lord, they are to be venerated with the same awe as the body and blood themselves." End quote. Christ in his divinity is obviously not confined to a specific place, and nevertheless the presence of Christ in the Eucharist is different somehow, and that presence extends to all of the accessories used in the celebration of the Mass. It is clear that the saints are also not limited in their power by the location of their earthly remains. At the end of the Vita Hilarion, his life of Hilarion, after describing the theft of Hilarion's body from Cyprus, where he died, and its relocation to Palestine by one of his disciples, Jerome describes the strange dispute between the people of Palestine and Cyprus, the one contending that they have the body, the other the spirit of Hilarion. And yet, Jerome closes the life, quote, "In both places great miracles are wrought daily, but to a greater extent in the Garden of Cyprus, perhaps because that spot was dearest to Hilarion." This notion can also be found in Jerome's letter 12 to Eustochium, where in encouraging the latter to the life of virginity, Jerome exhorts her, quote, "Rarely go abroad, and if you wish to seek the aid of the martyrs, seek it in your own chamber." End quote. One needn't go on pilgrimage to faraway places, because the aid of the saints can be sought in any place. If there is a contradiction here in Jerome's thought on the presence of the saints, it ought not be terribly surprising. The saints may be present everywhere, and yet their bodily remains, their clothing, and the locations of their earthly lives have a certain further power to work miracles. To define how these phenomena are reconcilable, just as he does not define how Christ's presence in the Eucharist differs from Christ's presence in all creation. He does not echo the more radical thought of Patricius of Rome, who argues that the relics of the saints are in effect consubstantial with God. Yet this is not to say that Jerome and Vigilantius were on the same side of this debate. Jerome is forced by Vigilantius to think theologically about the cults of the saints, to go beyond his epistolary and hagiographical writings that deal with some thorny issues, the relationship of the soul and the body, the connection between the living and the dead, the nature of the presence of the saints, and the efficacy of their relics. Vigilantius was not a minor heretic to be simply dismissed. He was an active member of an influential group in the Western Church. Indeed, Vigilantius seems to have been in the majority of Gallic clerics in his critiques of the cults of the saints, and the increasingly ardent asceticism of those who champion such cults. While Jerome's desire to be influential in Gallic affairs and his success in such influence is a matter of debate, it is clear, at least in this regard, that Jerome's position won out over that of his opponent. Gennadius of Marseille, in his Liber Ecclesiasticorum Dogmatum, written around the year 470, includes this entry. Quote, "The bodies of the saints, and especially the relics of the blessed martyrs, are to be honored as if they were the actual remains of Christ. If anyone thinks differently, he is to be considered a Vigilantian and not a Christian." Thank you.